And when things start to happen, it'll call back to the server and it'll run one of two functions. It will either run the title success or the fail function. So let's go ahead and implement title success. So these callback functions always have an argument, which is the response that comes from the server. And we'll go ahead and once again get reference to the control that we're working with. There we go. Now that we've heard back from the server, we can revert the UI back to the unaltered state. So let's basically just take these two lines here and we'll reverse what we've done. So we're going to remove the live input dirty class and we're going to add back in a live input class. Now, the way we're going to implement what's on the server, and you'll see this in a moment, is in such a way as to try and hide any exceptions that may have happened to the user. So there's still a chance that even though we're in this title success function, something still could have gone wrong on the server. So we need to take a look at our response argument here. So if we have an error, so if the response comes back as false, then what we're going to do is take our control and do a set value back to the old value, because we want to keep since it didn't succeed on the server, we want to keep the UI updated to what's actually on the server, and then we'll pop up an alert saying that something is wrong. All right, so the server encountered an error while trying to update the title. That seems fair enough. So we have one last piece that we need to do here to complete our JavaScript, and that is to create our fail function. And this takes a response argument as well. And here is where we totally punt and just add in some nonsensical code that you would never do in a production environment. So we'll stick up an alert and we'll say fail and then the response. Reason being is we just don't have time to implement something that is worthy of being put in here. But what we're doing on our server method is that we're wrapping up any exceptions that have happened, and we're going to have a placeholder for publishing them. So if this runs, basically something happened on the communications end. It's not we're wrapping up any sort of programmatic error on the program side. So maybe you tell them to try again, or you'll have to decide how to handle that appropriately. But we're going to deal with exception management in a moment. You'll see how we do that. So then really the last piece that has to come forth is to implement the code behind. So we'll drop over there. And we'll do the normal types of things. So if we're on the first request of this page, then what we'll do is we need to create a variable for our book. So we use that expression in order to get the book's primary key and the input value. So I'm going to make this a protected book, and we'll just call this book. Initialize it as null, and so we can come down here and say this book equals book repository instance get book by ID, and we're going to just grab book number 1. Now, if you're not familiar with the book repository, it's a fake mock test data repository that I've created in order to make testing and demos and things like this really easy, so that we get data objects without having to worry about talking to a database. But this will also support persistence. So as we do our persistence, you'll see that we can send a book object down in the repository and it will persist. It basically loads it into the cache, so it gives you kind of the illusion of persistence. It's not real. But for our purposes, it works really well. So what we're going to do here is we should have our txt title text, and we can say this book.title. And the only other thing that we need to do at this point is go back over into our HTML and we're going to use this expression. I think I talked about this before we actually put it in. But we'll add this expression in order to give the hidden HTML input its value. So we can say this book dot ID to string. So really quick here before we go on, there's a couple bugs that I needed to fix. So what you're going to see is me adding in the right CSS class and fixing a small bug within the JavaScript, and then we'll keep going. You got to put the right CSS class in. And so we'll do CSS class, and so we need live input and big. And let's just double check everything else. Oh, hey, and extra points if you caught this. This loop is wrong. This needs to be less than class's length. Okay, good. That hopefully that all looks good. Okay, so now that the expression is in there, let's go ahead and finish up our code behind. And so we'll drop back down in here. So we have to implement the update title page method. So the first thing that we need to do is use the web method attribute, and that lives inside of system.web.services. So now that we've got that, we can access this attribute web method. And then our method will be public and then static. Now it has to be static because when Ajax comes back, the ASP.NET Ajax comes back and looks at this class, it doesn't create an instance of the class. It's going to look at static methods. So we need to mark this as static, and then we're going to be returning a Boolean, and it's called update title. So we'll pass in an integer for the ID and then a string for the new title. So I'm going to add in a try catch block, and the reason for that is that if you encounter any sort of exception while we're doing our work, I want to be able to hide that from the client. So especially with an Ajax type of a setup, I don't want to return exception information up to the client, because then what are you going to do with it? And good exception management would say that we would want to publish or log or notify somehow if anything goes wrong. So what we'll do is stick this in a try catch block, and then we'll declare our book. And you could decide to do this many different ways, but for what I'm going to do right now is take a look at the repository, and I'm going to get the current version of the object that we're working with. So we'll pull this out of the repository, and then we'll update the title. So then when we've got that, we'll take it and shove it back down into the repository. So we'll say update. And then from here, basically the idea is that everything worked out well. No errors happened, so we can return true at this point. What we want to do down here at the bottom, here you'd want to publish your exceptions. And there's a lot of good resources out on the web about how to handle exception management, publishing exceptions. You want to save it to a text file, database, send an email, whatever you're going to do. But then what we'll do is we will do a return false. And then this way on the client we know something went wrong. And if you remember from our JavaScript, what we did was we set the old value back to being what the value of the control was, so that the UI matched what was in the system. Now we're going to get a little squiggly here. This isn't a huge deal, but I'm going to do system diagnostics, debug, and then write line ex.message. And this is a good place to set a breakpoint and see what's going on in case you have any problems. Now this is all working code. This is exactly what it should be, but I'm going to add one more thing, because if we don't, since all of this is on the same server, the UI is going to update so fast you'll never see any of this happen. So I'm going to sleep the thread for a moment. So we'll do system threading thread sleep, and just do 3 seconds. So let's go ahead and run this and see how it looks.